Let's take a quick look at a simplified architecture of the integrated solution. Very simply, on the left side of this diagram, you see some of the Appgate components there in this teal color. And on the right side, you see the Illumio policy compute engine with its functions in orange. And just to quickly walk through what we're looking at here. So in the far left, we have a user. In this case, this is going to represent me during the course of a demonstration. And so I'll be playing the role of a QA user. And ultimately, my Appgate client will first initiate a connection to the Appgate controller. And the Appgate controller will validate my identity against any identity providers that communicate via Radius, LDAP, SAML, or OIDC. And upon validating my identity, one of the things that will occur is obviously we'll pull back group membership information. And in doing so, I'll be determined to be a member of the QA group. In step 3 here, you can see that the controller is actually communicating directly with the Illumio PCE and is actually pulling back, in this case, information about workloads that have been deployed and labels that are associated with those workloads. In step 4, we're returning information from the controller back to the Appgate client running on the QA user's workstation that contains information about where the resources are that this user is allowed to access and the gateways that protect them. And so in step 5, the Appgate client will then dynamically connect to Appgate gateways. And step 6 shows that the user is being allowed to access only the protected QA resources because they're a member of that QA group. Now, on the back end, the Illumio PCE is actually controlling the east-west microsegmentation there. So once allowed to access the QA resources, this QA user will not be able to access any of the production resources. And so with that, let's dive right into a quick demonstration here. Okay, so you should now be seeing my screen here. And obviously, we are looking at the Illumio console. And specifically, I've got the illumination map pulled up in front of us. I have my illumination map in draft view, and I have applied a location label for my AWS Northern Virginia environment. And this is where we'll be performing our demonstration today. In this environment, as you can see, I've deployed 3 groups of resources. And I've labeled these resources as blue production, red production, and red QA. Again, I'm playing the role of a member of the QA team. So ultimately, Appgate will be pulling this information in from Illumio to allow me to access only these instances that are deployed as QA labeled resources. Now, on the back end, Illumio is, as I mentioned, is controlling the east-west microsegmentation here. And so from a microsegmentation perspective, we have a very basic policy that essentially allows for QA labeled resources to communicate with one another. And it also allows for production labeled resources to communicate with one another within the same application group. We are not, however, allowing any intergroup communication. So we see a lot of red arrows between those resource groups here. Just to kind of point out some of the instances I'll be working with through this demonstration, I do want to point out that my production database server is currently at an IP address of 10.201.4.9. My 2 QA instances here have IP addresses that end in 4.7 and 4.8. I'm just pointing those out so that you can distinguish between them as we proceed into our demonstrations. This is the Appgate client. As you can see here, I am currently signed in. I've actually been connected to 3 sites, and one of those sites is this AWS North Virginia site. What that means is essentially that I've been served at least one Appgate entitlement to something in that site. And so my Appgate client has actually connected to a gateway there. There's really nothing more for me to know about that from an end user perspective, really just pointing that out to you to show you that this is what I've been connected to. Again, playing the role of a member of the QA team, I've now moved over to my command prompt here, and I'm going to first attempt to log into one of the production resources. And so when I issue this SSH command attempting to reach that 10.201.4.9 instance, as expected, my SSH attempt is actually going to time out here. I'm not going to be able to access that resource, and I should not be as a member of the QA team. I should, however, be able to access the 2 QA resources. And so in real time, again, Appgate is pulling in label information from Illumio to determine that I should be able to access those resources. Now, one thing to point out here is that we've actually applied a condition on the Appgate side that actually requires a more stringent level of security control in the form of step-up multi-factor authentication in order for me to access this QA resource. And so this is helpful in preventing a situation where an unlocked laptop maybe is swiped at a coffee shop and a bad guy now has access to the crown jewels and everything on your network. And so in doing this, I'm actually prompted, as you can see here, for MFA first. We chose to require FIDO2 or YubiKey authentication for that. But upon responding to that by tapping on the side of my YubiKey, as you can see here, I've been allowed to log into this 4.7 QA resource. Just to show you that the same thing would be true if I were to log into or attempt to log into the 4.8 resource. If I issue my SSH command pointing at 4.8, I can reach that resource. Now, much like with my local attempts to access the production resource, again, Illumio is controlling east-west microsegmentation here. So I should not be able to move laterally and access the production resource from one of these QA resources. So if I issue this SSH command attempting to reach the 4.9 from the 4.8 here, as you can see, that SSH attempt will time out. But I should be able to move laterally over to the 4.7 server, and I'm allowed to do that. As you can see here, I've been able to log into 4.7 from 4.8. I'm now logging out of the 4.7 from 4.8 and logging out of the 4.8 entirely. So as you can see, I'm sitting back at the command prompt on my local workstation. And what we're going to do next is what would happen if we were to change the label on one of these resources. And so for this, I'm going to actually move that production labeled resource into my QA group. And so in doing so, what I'm doing here is opening up the workload configuration. I'm going to take a look at this 4.9 instance, and we're going to dynamically move this from production to QA and save it. After saving this, within a few seconds here, we'll come back to the illumination map, and we should see that that formerly production labeled resource will now appear in the group with the QA resources. And after we do that, we'll initiate an attempt to reach that resource as a member of the QA team. So again, as we can see here, I can reach, the 4.9 resource is now in my QA labeled group. And so if I were to attempt this same demonstration pointing at the 4.9 resource now, as you can see here, within a few seconds, I'm able to reach that resource. Now, there's one last thing I do want to demonstrate here for you, and that is that we've also applied another condition for access to these QA labeled resources in the form of some posture assessment. And for very basic demonstrational purposes here, I've chosen to apply a policy that essentially forbids my end users from having any sort of virtualization software open on their workstation while they're interacting with these. So what I'm doing right now is opening up my Parallels desktop. And just by the nature of having this application running, I'm now forbidden from accessing those QA resources. And so within a few seconds here, if I attempt to reach the 4.9 resource again, as you can see here, I'm not allowed to do so. The Appgate client has just popped up a message stating that the reason that access is denied is because I'm running something that's forbidden. There's obviously a lot more that we can do here in terms of applying dynamic policies and access for protected resources. But hopefully this has been helpful in terms of helping you to understand how Appgate and Illumio can better help you control access to your protected and sensitive resources.